Snow White and the Poisoned Apple, recorded by the brothers Grimm in 1812. Some stories are whispered through generations, their magic never fading. Snow White is one such tale, a story of beauty and envy, of innocence and betrayal, of a girl whose light could not be dimmed by darkness. First recorded by the brothers Grimm in 1812, Snow White has captured hearts for centuries with its timeless mix of mystery, danger, and love. At its core lies a princess of unmatched beauty, a queen consumed by jealousy, and a poisoned apple that changes everything. Locked in a battle between purity and wickedness, Snow White is forced from the only home she has ever known, finding refuge in a hidden cottage deep within the forest. But even there, fate is not finished with her. A single bite, a moment of trust, and the world as she knows it slips away. Yet, fairy tales are not only about despair, they are about hope, resilience, and the triumph of love over cruelty. What happens when a heart refuses to be broken? When kindness proves stronger than hatred? When a single kiss rewrites destiny? This is a tale of courage and betrayal, of innocence tested, and love victorious, a story that has stood the test of time. Now let us journey into the world of Snow White. Once upon a time, in a grand castle, there lived a queen whose beauty was unmatched, until one fateful day. She had a magical mirror that never lied. Every day she would stand before it and ask, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" For years, the mirror always answered, "You, my queen, are the fairest of all." But one morning the answer changed. "You, my queen, are fair, it's true, but Snow White is fairer than you." The queen's face darkened. Snow White, her own stepdaughter, had surpassed her in beauty. Envy consumed her heart, and she could think of nothing else. She ordered a huntsman to take Snow White deep into the forest and kill her. But the huntsman, unable to harm the innocent girl, spared her and told her to flee. Terrified and alone, Snow White ran through the dark forest until she stumbled upon a small cottage. Inside, everything was tiny. Tiny chairs, tiny plates, tiny beds. Curious and exhausted from her journey, she fell asleep on one of the beds. That evening, the owners of the house returned, 7 dwarfs who worked in the mines. They were surprised to find a beautiful young girl asleep in their home. When she awoke, she told them her story, and the dwarfs, moved by her kindness, offered her a home. But they warned her never to open the door for strangers. Back in the castle, the queen once again stood before her mirror. "Mirror, mirror, on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" The mirror replied, "You, my queen, are fair, it's true, but Snow White, beyond the mountains with the 7 dwarfs, is fairer than you." The queen's blood boiled. Snow White was still alive? If she wanted the girl gone, she would have to do it herself. Disguising herself as an old peddler woman, she journeyed to the dwarf's cottage. Her first trick was a silk lace corset. She convinced Snow White to try it on and pulled it so tight that the girl couldn't breathe. Snow White collapsed. Thinking her dead, the queen left. But the dwarfs returned in time and loosened the corset, saving her life. The next time, the queen disguised herself as a comb seller. She offered Snow White a beautiful poisoned comb. As soon as Snow White placed it in her hair, she fell unconscious. Again the queen left, thinking she had won. But the dwarfs returned and removed the comb, reviving her once more. Now furious, the queen came up with her most wicked plan. She took a shiny red apple and coated half of it with a deadly poison. Dressed as an old woman, she approached Snow White's cottage for the 3rd time. "Ah, my dear child, look at this perfect apple. One bite and all your dreams will come true." Snow White hesitated. "I was warned not to take anything from strangers." The queen, pretending to be innocent, took a bite from the unpoisoned half. "See? It's perfectly safe." Snow White, convinced, took the apple and bit into the poisoned side. Her eyes widened. The world spun. She collapsed to the ground. The queen laughed triumphantly and disappeared into the forest. This time there was no saving Snow White. When the dwarfs found Snow White, she was cold and lifeless. Heartbroken, they could not bring themselves to bury her. Instead, they built a glass coffin and placed her in it, so her beauty would never fade. Days passed, then weeks, then months. The dwarfs never left her side. She lay inside the glass coffin, her body untouched by time. Her skin remained as pale as fresh snow, her lips red as the poisoned apple, and her hair as dark as the midnight sky. Animals from the forest came to see her. Birds perched on the edges of the coffin. Deer and rabbits bowed their heads in sorrow. The dwarfs took turns keeping watch, their hearts heavy with grief. Even the sky seemed to mourn her. Some days the rain fell as if the heavens themselves were crying. Other days the sun shone gently, casting golden light upon her face, as though it too wished to wake her. Yet no matter how much love surrounded her, Snow White remained still. One day, a prince from a faraway kingdom was traveling through the forest. He had heard tales of the beautiful maiden who slept in the glass coffin, guarded by 7 dwarfs. Curious, he sought out the dwarf's cottage. When he arrived and saw Snow White, he was spellbound. He had never seen anyone so radiant, so peaceful, yet so lifeless. He turned to the dwarfs, his voice filled with awe. "Who is she?" "She was Snow White," said Grumpy, his voice heavy with sadness. "The kindest soul to ever walk this earth." The prince knelt beside the coffin, gazing at her in sorrow. Something in his heart stirred, a deep sense of longing, of recognition, as if he had known her in another life. "May I take her with me?" he asked softly. "She deserves to rest in a place of honor." The dwarfs hesitated. They had protected her for so long, but seeing the sincerity in his eyes, they finally nodded. With great care, the prince's men lifted the coffin. As they carried it, one of the men stumbled, and in that brief jolt, something shifted within Snow White. The piece of poisoned apple lodged in her throat was dislodged. Snow White's chest rose sharply, her eyes fluttered open. She gasped, air filling her lungs for the first time in what felt like an eternity. The prince and the dwarfs froze in shock. Snow White sat up slowly, her fingers trembling as she touched the glass of her coffin. The last thing she remembered was the sweet taste of the apple. And then, darkness. Now, she was awake, alive. The dwarfs burst into joyful tears. The prince stared at her, his heart pounding. Snow White blinked at them all. What happened? Overwhelmed with happiness, the dwarfs and the prince told her everything. The evil queen, the apple, the long sleep. Snow White pressed a hand to her chest, feeling the steady beat of her heart. She was alive again. Back at the castle, the queen once again asked her mirror, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" The mirror replied, "You, my queen, are fair, it's true, but Snow White is alive and fairer than you." The queen's heart filled with terror. She had been defeated. Snow White and the prince married and lived happily ever after. As for the 7 dwarfs, they continued their lives in the forest, knowing that their dear friend was finally safe. And so, good triumphed over evil, and the fairest of them all lived in peace. This is a tale of redemption and peace, of love conquering hate, and of a girl who, against all odds, found her happily ever after. Now it's a time to end the story of Snow White.